Next up is Dr. Greg Aldrich, another one who really doesn't need much in the way of introductions as it relates to the pet food industry, and we really do appreciate Greg's efforts with respect to sorghum research. It's been quite powerful, the data that he's collected for us, and for those of you who have not been to our sorghum checkoff website, we have a nice setup there with respect to the pet food industry. Well, much of that is attributed to Dr. Aldrich and the work that he's done. So kudos to Dr. Aldrich. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Doug.
You got it.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you for the invitation and all the work that you've done. I've got about 15 minutes to do 45 minutes worth of presentations, so buckle up. We're going to go down the path here really quick. Most of you should have this information in your packet somewhere along the line, and if you're not able to get to that, let me know, and we'll get more of it to you. The things that I want to talk about a little bit today are the trends in the pet food industry, talk a little bit about some of the research we've done in the use of sorghum from a nutritional standpoint, and then a little bit of product development work. And so it's not all going to be hardcore nutrition. We at K-State in our pet food program, it's kind of a unique area. We're looking at the effects of processing on nutrition, safety, and shelf life. So we have a very strong nutrition component, or research component, but we also do a fair bit of outreach and instruction. So this is the pet food industry. It grows and grows and grows. In the U.S., it's about a $33 billion industry today. And it seems to be resistant to the vagaries of recession. So through 2007, 8, 9, it did not decrease. We kept growing at about 4% year over year. Now that's an increase in the total amount of sales. The total volume of pet food seems to be rather static or stable at about 8.5 million metric tons U.S. If we were to expand that number out globally, just take that by 3. The U.S. is roughly 1/3 of the international or global market for pet foods. Pet food represents 40% of the overall pet space. And by the way, today is National Dog Day, so what a scheduling coup. One of the things that's going on that's driving this increase in value but a static level of amount of pet food is the changing demographics of the population in the U.S. as well as increasing disposable income. Today there are more pets, twice as many pets in U.S. households as there are children under the age of 18. The pet is the new furry kid. Sometimes it's hard to see which is which, the child or the dog. And in some cases for young families, especially for our millennials and Gen Z, these younger generation, the pet is sort of a child with training wheels or an extra set of legs, right? And so it's where we're seeing a lot of increase in pet ownership. 70% or so of pet owners out there associate themselves with being a pet parent. And so it's a whole new era for pet food. And with that, we're talking about a consumer packaged goods. It's no longer about utility. It's not about barnyard security and rodent control. This is a member of the family. And so in the consumer packaged goods area, we're talking about a lot of things that might actually start to resemble human food applications. One of the things that may be a boon for our friends in the sorghum business is in the last year, July 2018, the FDA came out with a report that indicated that there were certain numbers of dogs and dogs specifically, that were being diagnosed with a disease called dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM. DCM has been attributed to low levels of circulating taurine, and they end up with congestive heart failure. In this study, they've been identifying that these dogs were being fed a diet that was based off of grain-free. Grain-free, legumes, chickpeas, or legumes and tubers, so chickpeas, peas, lentils, and potatoes, tapioca, sweet potatoes, and not on grains. That was 25% of the market. This put a significant halt in the increasing level of the grain-free diets that are being introduced into the market. And today, last week was the Super Zoo in Las Vegas, where there were 30,000 pet retailers and food companies, and the hottest products in the marketplace were ancient grains. Guess what? Sorghum is an ancient grain. And so sorghum use and incorporation into pet food has really hit sort of a high point. So, does it really fit with pet food? In short, it's got an adequate level of nutrients that I, as a formulator, can use without difficulty. There's research that's been done on this product for literally decades. This was work out of the University of Illinois. Let me see if I can hit the button again. There you go. Sorghum compares very favorably to corn and the other cereals that I might use in a grain-based pet food diet. It also has a fair level of resistant starch, which is something that we're really starting to explore more now for colonic health in dogs and cats. Let's see if I can point out the resistant starch level here. So here's sorghum at about 36%, which is favorable to corn and other cereals. It also has a fair amount of total dietary fiber. That's a good thing if I'm formulating for a complete and nutritionally balanced diet for our companion animals. So if I look at the other elements in the diet, the organic matter, protein, fat, starch, and the rest, and I'm evaluating, come back here, I knew that was going to happen, and I'm evaluating it on the digestibility at the small intestine. I see that the protein level, as we've already kind of discussed here, the protein digestibility might be slightly lower than some of the other cereal grains. Most pet foods are formulated way over the requirement for their protein levels, so that's not really an issue. More importantly, though, I end up with a fair amount of TDF, as we've already kind of indicated, and the overall starch digestibility is equal to the other cereals and the other carbohydrate sources I might use. So again, it continues to pass the test for whether it has application. This is a compilation of two studies, both out of the same laboratory. And on the top here we have dog and we have cat work. And we're comparing corn versus sorghum. And these are the postprandial, or after the meal, glucose and insulin in their circulation for those two grains. Corn is very rapidly digested. And so we see a very quick spike in glucose and subsequently a pretty substantial demand on insulin from those animals when they're fed those diets. So there's corn, rapid spike and then a decline. We see a slightly different glycemic response in dogs and in cats when they're fed sorghum, in that there is a delay in that spike of glucose and subsequently a lower demand on insulin secretion by the pancreas when they're fed these diets. Cats play their own rules, and you can see that the sorghum glycemic response in cats differs quite a bit from that of the dogs, and it actually fits very well into a diet that we may need to be feeding to a type 2 diabetic cat, and there are a lot of them out there. Okay. The other value to sorghum, as Dr. Hancock just described, was this tannin situation. They are actually condensed tannins, and we refer to them as general phenolic compounds. And human medicine has identified that it may be beneficial, and we wanted to see if they were beneficial to pets. And so we conducted a study with support by the U.S. Sorghum Checkoff, and we actually milled sorghum. We have the advantage at K-State of having a full flour mill and the extrusion lab right next door. So we took sorghum and milled it into flour. And then we converted those into pet diets. These are what the flours look like. So we had the red sorghum. This was just ground whole sorghum. Sorghum mill feed, which is the bran layer that I was really most interested in for this project. And then the resulting sorghum flour. We produced diets, basically extruded kibbles for each of those diets. The green ones up here are simply that we've added titanium dioxide, or excuse me, chromium oxide to there so we can have it for a digestibility marker. The products that we use in consumer panels were the brown products here. We conducted the studies and the composition of the work. You can see here that we've got whole sorghum, sorghum flour, sorghum bran, and sorghum germ. And the point that I really want to emphasize here is that for the bran, we got a nice bump in the amount of fiber. That was expected. And in that fiber component, we can see that for the bran, this mill feed layer, that we've got a lot of total dietary fiber, much greater than the flour or the whole sorghum, and that's what we would expect. It's mostly insoluble, so a bulking type of fiber, and it's a high concentration of lignin. Acid detergent lignin is where we would, in a gross manner, accumulate or measure these phenolic compounds that are coming from that seed coat and the tannins. We made those diets, we fed them to dogs, we've also fed them to cats, and we found that the bran-based diet, the digestibility across the board was much lower. That was not unexpected. What was the demonstration here of value is that the diet with whole ground sorghum was equivalent to our control diet that was corn, rice, and wheat, and that the sorghum flour diet fed superior to those two. Now you would say, Dr. Aldrich, the level of bran in there was actually a negative. Well, maybe not so much, because when we measured the circulating level of antioxidants in the bloodstream of those dogs, we got a twofold increase in their antioxidant capabilities with that bran-based diet. Now keep in mind that 50% of dogs in the U.S. are overweight or obese, so a little bit lower digestibility is a good thing, and an increase in the glucose response and an increase in this phenolic or antioxidant response is a positive. So the net here is that we may have a real positive opportunity. All right, so that's the food side of the equation. We saw that we could have a benefit to the animal's health. Currently today, there are no pet treats, the cookies, the biscuits, and other that we give for friendship and emotional connection with our animal. And that's the fastest growing category in the pet food space. Now granted, we've got a little obesity, and so we probably need to monitor that a little bit more closely. But the question was, should we or could we use sorghum in pet treat applications? So we were looking at two different kinds. I'll go through those rather quickly. The first one was to create crisps out of extrusion from sorghum flour, and to take those crisps, which are like Rice Krispies, and agglomerate them with some sort of a binding agent to make a granola bar for dogs. There's also no granola bars in the market for dogs. You'd think, as humanized as we are, there would be. So we went through this process of milling red and white sorghum into flour, and then converted that flour into these sorghum crisps. And then those sorghum crisps, we had to use something to bind them together. I don't like to use sugar, corn syrup in dog diets. They do have a little bit of a sweet tooth, but it's really probably not the right thing. How about if we make this into a pet food application and we use something like a protein as our binding agent? So we started to work with a number of soluble animal-based proteins to help us bind those together. Things like plasma, spray-dried plasma from swine production, egg proteins, egg whites specifically, and gelatin. And we created a syrup, we added that to the dry ingredients, and then we mixed, formed, and we baked ever so slightly, so then we ended up creating these granola bars for dogs. So what's the big question in granola bars? Okay, we've shown that we can do it. The big question for me is do the consumers want that, the pet owners, pet parents? And then the second is will the dog or the cat accept them? In this case, we did some studies. We've developed a ranking test for palatability assessment. We basically take the treat and we put it into this puzzle toy, otherwise known as a Kong. And we put 5 of them out there in front of the animals, and we let them go pick. And we rank them as to which one they select. Now, it's a little bit of a puzzle, so they have to work at it. And the idea here, the premise is that if they like it, if they want it, they'll work harder to get it, which means that that will be the one that they like the most, right? And we were able to do that, showing that whether it's the Rice Crisp or the white sorghum or the red sorghum, the flavors with the spray-dried plasma, lower is better here, by the way. Lower is better. That's the one they preferred most, that the spray-dried plasma gave us a better response. So we were able to show also that the red and white sorghum were no different than the Rice Krispie that was our control. So they liked the white sorghum in a treat, in a granola bar with plasma. We wanted to go one step further, and that's with a baked biscuit. Most of you know about milk bones as a treat product. They're rotary molded and baked like a cookie. And we were using the same sort of scenario here, red versus white sorghum versus wheat in this case. And we're looking at using those single soluble animal-based proteins as the binder to replace the gluten that came from the wheat-based biscuits. So we get continuous binding there. And here's the outcome of those products. We actually ended up with some pretty good-looking treat products. And the durability seems to be improved when we use the, I think it's egg protein, if I'm looking at that correctly. So the idea is we can substitute out of the wheat-based biscuit an egg protein in a white or red sorghum and get good durability. And again, the dogs didn't seem to mind which ones they got. There was actually a preference for one of the protein sources here under this first study, and it was the egg protein. When we go to the human panels and we superimpose our data, remember dogs and cats can't talk, so we have to use descriptive analysis with human taste panels, and we use PCA analysis to try to overlap those two data sets. So we're trying to give the voice to the dog or the cat here, and we can see that the control diet is clear over here, and the animals actually preferred to be, and the humans actually preferred the products up here. And those were the ones that we had the various soluble proteins and the white, I believe it was the white sorghum. Okay? All right. So the takeaways. Sorghum is a superfood as far as I'm concerned. It meets a lot of those requirements that we're trying to address with antioxidants, protein quality, starch quality, processing quality as it relates to pet food. And it provides an option, especially as we're moving into this changing market as an ancient grain. A couple of things I want to point out here. Some of you may or may not be aware of pet food and what we do. There's a couple of events coming up. One on campus at K-State. It's called the Pet Food R&D Showcase. We'll go into a lot more of this kind of work. For those of you that have an interest in formulation, I'm going to be teaching a short course on commercial pet food formulation in January. We take you all the way through the process. So if you want to learn how to do the formulations to take back to your home country and your company, and you'd like to learn how to use sorghum, we'll certainly have some opportunities to do that. Thank you, guys.